So, as you all know, this conference, the symposium, marks the exhibition, The Pursuit of Immortality, and the Scher collection. The exhibition, which unfortunately is coming to an end and closes in just about 2 days on Sunday. But it's worth thinking and marking this symposium very much as the beginning also of something else and a new chapter in the life of the Scher collection, and very much in the hope that the Frick will be a center for the study of medals going forwards for the future of the institution. Now, all medals have an obverse and a reverse, well, almost all of them, except from the uniface ones, which we'll ignore. But I think this is the time to thank the obverse and the reverse of the medal in a way. And in terms of the exhibition and this project, our own Amy Ng has been an amazing force of nature, as we all know, behind every aspect of the project, the catalog, the display, as you've seen, and partly organizing this conference as well with Robert. And basically, I think I would like to have a round of applause for Amy and for all our hard work on this. But the catalyst behind all of this, of course, our own treasure today that we're celebrating, is Stephen Scher. And I would like to start by quoting a strange document that I found recently from April 5th, 1937. And this is written by Frederick Mortimer Clapp, our first director of the Frick Collection, who was the director from the 1930s when the museum opened until 1950. And he wrote a document called Towards a Policy of Acquisitions. And it was at a time when trustees and this new director of a new institution were trying to think what would fit at the Frick and what wouldn't. And so he writes, in acquiring new works of art, a certain tone has already been set from which we cannot depart without discord. And he continues by discussing how paintings or tapestries of heroic proportions would not be appropriate because we don't really have the space here. But then he comments, well, we do have the space in the East Gallery, however, for canvases larger than most of those now there. So he opens a window for that. And in the same way, he talks about very small objects that wouldn't be appropriate here, like engraved gems, medals, or miniatures. He worries about the proliferation of glass cases in the museum. But he concludes yet again, contradicting himself and saying, when the time comes to open one or more of the second floor rooms, a proper sense of proportion would require that the larger paintings and objects remain as a rule on the first floor and that the smaller be moved upstairs. So he's already in 1937 thinking ahead in terms of that. In the history of our own institution, I think it's worth remarking that it's actually also thanks to another director, Charles Reiskamp, that we had two exhibitions on medals, both curated by Stephen Scher, The Currency of Fame and The Proud Republic, which really proved to everyone in New York and outside of New York that medals do fit at the Frick, and that notwithstanding how many vitrines you want to put in various places, be it the garden court or the downstairs gallery, they very much fit with what we do, with what we have, and the mission of the museum. But the shift in the study of medals from the 18th century to the 19th century to the modern days in museums has been a huge one. And I think over the last 50 years, over the last decades, Steve Scher has really been key in promoting medals in the city, in this country, in the world. And the two exhibitions that I just mentioned were really milestones in the change in perception and the study of this medium. In working with Stephen closely, Amy and I and the team at the Frick, we've grown to admire Stephen more and more, and not just for his love for medals, but for his love and interest in so many different things in life. And we've discovered, his great love as an alumnus for Yale, but also his huge interest in the ballet, and then least obvious things like his interest in falconry or his interest in, his work on a documentary on French restaurants in Paris. So really a man for all seasons, and someone who we're very proud to have here at the Frick as part of the family in a way, and someone that we're immensely thankful for for transforming really this collection, first of all by transforming the interest of the directors, curators, and the public into this incredible form, the medallic art medals, but also for being so generous in this great gift that will keep transforming the collection. And as I say, this will be the beginning of great interest in medals and future studies and exhibitions in this topic. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Stephen Scher and welcome him to the podium.
Nobody left me anything else to say. Just a note to Emerson, we're still using the Trésor. I mean, the Trésor is a valuable source. I was just using it to date something. So it was a success, whatever happened to the machine, it was a success. I also feel a certain sympathy for Dr. Lichtwark, because he was trying to do something that I've been trying to do, and that is to promote this extraordinary object, the portrait medal. When I bought my first medal, which I was a graduate student, since everybody said everything else, I'll have to just talk about myself, I guess. I was taking a course in called Museum Training, which is now called Curatorial Studies at the Institute of Fine Arts. And one of the little projects, it was actually a competition, it was sort of in addition to taking courses. I mean, we had to have some relief because the courses, I can tell you, didn't give you very much relief. I remember when we had first orientation, Professor Carl Lehmann was introducing the institute to us. And he said, there are 24 hours in the day. He said, you'll be expected to work 22 of them. You can do whatever you want with the other 2. And that's the way it was. But for this little competition, it was kind of a break from that study. So we were all sent out into the art market in New York to purchase a work of art. The limit that we were given was $10. Now, this is in the mid-50s. So that's maybe a little bit understandable. Now, you're sent out to discover a work of art that you propose to a department at the Met. And I think the limit is something like $1,000. I found a medal and brought it back, and I didn't win the competition. The competition was won by a classicist who presented a piece of Iznik pottery. I've never forgotten that. It's always rankled somehow. And it also turned out that the medal that I found, much later I discovered, was a 17th century restitution of a 15th century papal medal, which originally had been cast. What I bought was struck. And not only was it struck, but the reverse die was struck from a cracked die. So all of you who are collectors know that we do make mistakes, and that's the way we learn. But it was, I mean, the thing that I was looking for and the thing that I found was a medal. And I suppose I must have seen other things. I know as a student I cruised around art galleries and picked up a thing here and there, some pre-Columbian objects. But this was a medal. And it was a medal because I had been turned on to the idea of the medal by an interest in history, by courses that I took at Yale, and by, and so many of you know this already, by reading Jakob Burckhardt's Civilization of the Renaissance in Italy. And I just was so excited about that period. And I suppose I should say, please raise your hands if you heard this story, because if you have, I won't tell it. As a student, as an undergraduate, I was wandering around in Florence, and I saw an art dealer. And with the background of Burckhardt, which I read as an undergraduate, I went into the art dealer's shop, and I said, what have you got for sale? I mean, I wasn't going to buy anything, but he was very kind, and he showed me several things. And one of the things he showed me was a medal. And you can see an example of that medal in the exhibition. I'm almost certain it was the medal of Sigismund the Malatesta with his castle on the reverse. And it was like a lightning strike or an electrical shock. Something happened. Because from the printed word, which you have to use your imagination to sort of picture what Burckhardt was telling us about the Italian Renaissance and the people who inhabited that Renaissance, these exciting individuals, to an actual realization. I could have been looking at a painted portrait, I guess, but here was this Renaissance prince in profile, severe, proud, in armor. As I discovered later, he was a famous and even infamous condottiere. He was a mercenary soldier. He was also the ruler of Rimini, and it just spoke to me in a very, very direct way. And after that, I was hooked. And that was well before I made my first mistake with buying a medal. And that's the way it went. And I think to come to this point, where we have had this truly remarkable symposium with all of these really, really good papers, that bring the study of the medal, and this has been mentioned already, into the area of art history, identified as sculpture, because the foundation of the medal, of course, is numismatics, is the coin. That was perhaps the most important model, both ideologically and physically, for the production of the medal. But it was an object that was produced that somehow almost immediately spoke to the aspirations, the beliefs, whatever was at the core of Renaissance culture. It spoke to that. And for me, it was terribly evocative. And also, it was an original creation of the Renaissance, as we've been told. And it was an original creation by neither a mint master or a die cutter or a sculptor. It was an original creation by a painter, one of the great painters of that period, and a painter who, in all of his glorious productions, tells us that he is a painter. And what he produced then just took off. And I always try to think of some kind of analogies, and all I can think of is either pet rocks or hula hoops or something, something that immediately took hold, because it really did satisfy what was obviously a nascent need in the Renaissance. And it's continued to serve that purpose ever since. But I think the important thing that has occurred is the emergence of this object, which I've always tried to present as sculpture, from a certain, what shall I call it? A certain limited existence. I have nothing against the field of numismatics. I think it's a really, and I've always collected coins as well, but from a limited existence, almost as a stepchild of numismatics, centered on coinage, to an object of sculpture as a work of art. And one of the questions that has arisen today to some extent, and that I've always asked myself, is who made the medals? How were they commissioned? What was the source of the portrait? But particularly, what artists decided to make a medal? We were discussing that a little bit among ourselves in relation to some of the papers. We know that the origin is a painter, but after that, it does seem to sort of circulate in terms of production within certain circles of mint masters, die cutters, things of that sort, people of that sort. So it has been a long and very satisfying journey through the two exhibitions here. And when I walked into the garden court today, I sort of saw the ghost of Currency of Fame there. And Amy pointed out on the wall, well, it's not only a ghost, here's an evidence of where the case was, because there's a mark on the wall. But I think the emergence of the subject has been extremely important for me, to a point where, represented by this symposium and by this extraordinary exhibition. And you have already offered some thanks, but I have the deepest gratitude to everyone who participated in this, particularly my co-curator, who is inexhaustible, imaginative, productive, and I can't find enough adjectives to describe. And also a very effective taskmaster. Because we're working now on the big catalog, and I can tell you that if I ever leave the grindstone, that is noticed and commented upon. Our director, and I say our because you said I was part of the family, Ian Wardropper, who has been an unfailing support for a difficult project, difficult in terms of how to present it and the way in which this has come together. Xavier, as a sort of overall chief curatorial management of this project, has been remarkable. In particular, also for this symposium, Robert Wellington and Melanie, who came up with the idea quite a while ago and saw it through with the help of Amy. This was a tremendous idea, and I'm very grateful that, very grateful that you thought that something like this should be done. And it's been done remarkably well. But, and also the exhibition. Medals, as you probably all realize, are extremely difficult objects to exhibit. And all of us who were traveling, took innumerable photographs of installations everywhere. What was it? How many? 200 and some images in a file. And we looked over them again and again to try and solve the problem of how to present these objects. They're small, they're two-sided, they're often sort of dark, and they're very difficult to light. And you want to see them. And as we pointed out, they are not objects to be imprisoned in museum cases. They are objects to be held, to be passed around, to be commented on, and to be turned over. Something that Amy was very, very conscious of in relation to how these would be presented to the public. And therefore you have, as you've seen, little rather eccentric things like a medal that turns around. Oh, I didn't tell you that the other night when we did a tour for the fellows, it had stopped. It had stopped it had stopped this way, so you couldn't see anything. So we had to engage one of the engineers to, we got it going again. And to have that medal stop, I mean, as it turns, there's so many good stories about it. And I was just stymied because I couldn't tell my story. But everything in the exhibition has a story. The installation that was, as you'll see, as you have seen perhaps, the installation that now that has been there is the work of Stephen Saidis, and for lighting, which is extremely difficult, Anita Jorgensen, that they too deserve all of our thanks because it's a masterpiece of installation. But if I were to go on and thank everybody, particularly in this remarkable institution, who participated in this project, you wouldn't get into the garden court to have a drink. So I'm not going to do that, except to say that, in fact, in this remarkable institution, the staff has been unparalleled. They've been incredible, everyone. And I think of the poor guards who had to listen to me give tours over and over again. With a sort of resolution on their faces that I knew what they were thinking. But they were learning too. They were learning also, and I learned all the way through. So thank you for being here, and I hope that the future, as we talked about a center for study of medals, that will come about, and there will be also, we hope, a permanent gallery, and welcome to the Frick.